guidance will never come back to them until the Day of Judgment. Why? Because they think this now is guidance. And so this we see, many of the Muslims are engrossed in many innovations in acts of worship or in other things like certain celebrations which have no basis in Islam. And as a result of engaging in these things, they abandon a fair share or a portion of the religion. And, they will not turn to those things because they think that this thing here is from the religion. This is the great danger of innovations in the religion. So Al-Barbahari continues and he says, فَإِنَّ كُلَّ مُحْدَثَةٍ بِدْعَةٍ وَكُلَّ بِدْعَةٍ ضَلَالَةٍ وَالضَّلَالَةُ وَأَهْلُهَا فِي النَّارِ. For indeed every newly introduced affair into the religion is an innovation. And every innovation is misguidance. And misguidance and its people are in the hellfire. Right? So innovation is the way that the religion becomes altered. This is what the Jews did. This is what the Christians did. The Jews, they mixed with the nations. They were hosted by other nations, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Egyptians. And whilst they were under these nations, they accepted their culture, their religion, their doctrines, their worship, and they imported this into the religion. Right? They innovated and thereby they altered the religion. This is something that's happened in the past. So innovation is the way that the religion becomes altered, and it leads to splits. And this is why we see here that anyone who falls into misguidance, then he is threatened with the hellfire. Then Al-Barbahari says another very important thing. He says, وَاحْذَرْ صِغَارَ الْمُحْدَثَاتِ مِنَ الْأُمُورِ فَإِنَّ صِغَارَ الْبِدَعِ تَعُودُ حَتَّى تَصِيرَ كِبَارًا. He says, beware of the small things, the things which start small. Right? Start small, insignificant. Something new, but it's very small and insignificant. Because the small innovations, they eventually end up being huge. They turn into something huge. And every innovation that was introduced into this nation, at the beginning, it was something small. It was something small. It would resemble the truth. يُشْبِهُ الْحَقِّ. It would resemble the truth. And by way of that, whoever entered into it was deceived. And then he was not able to come out of it. Right? And so then this innovation became big. It became a religion. People then took it as a religion and they opposed the straight path and they departed from Islam. I'll give you an example. I'll give you like an illustration of how this can happen. So let's take the example of the Mu'tazila. The Mu'tazila are a sect, and this sect, they basically went astray because they tried to use reason and analogy, and they tried to apply it to certain affairs of the religion. And one of the things they said was that, by way of example, they said that they said that a person who they said a person who commits a sin or a person who does a righteous deed, then this cannot have been decreed upon him by Allah. Allah could not have decreed that upon him. Because if Allah decreed that upon him, then how can they be rewarded or punished? Because this does not seem like justice, right? It doesn't seem like justice. If Allah has decreed for a person to commit a sin and then punishes him, or if Allah has decreed a person to do a righteous deed and then rewards him, then where's the justice in this? Right? And so therefore it must be the case that Allah has no role, has no power, no ability over the actions of man. Right? When a man acts, He's acting completely outside the domain of Allah's power, creative power, right? This actually means that there happens in Allah's creation what Allah Himself has no power over, right? This is the consequence of that argument, right? When you say, how can Allah reward and punish when He's decreed it upon the servants, right? The consequence of that argument is that there happens in Allah's creation that which Allah is not a creator of, that which He has no power over, right? This means that there is in existence creators other than Allah. We are creating our own actions outside of Allah's power and control. And this is why the Messenger of Allah, he resembled these people whom he prophesied would appear. He said, they are the Magians, the fire worshippers of this nation. The fire worshippers, right? The fire worshippers are the Persians, the Magians. They used to believe in a God of good and a God of evil. The God of good was light and the God of evil was darkness. And evil comes from the God of evil, right? So in other words, what the likeness is that when man does something evil, he drinks, he fornicates, he cheats, he steals, he lies, he murders, or whatever he does in evil, he himself created that action, did that action completely outside of the control and power of Allah Azza wa Jal. He created his own action outside of Allah's creative power. So he's now become a creator alongside Allah Azza wa Jal, right? So this is the consequence of that argument, right? The point that I'm making from this is one example of their innovation. They had a few others, and they started in the beginning of the 2nd century. Right at the beginning, 100 Hijrah, 110 Hijrah, 120 Hijrah, right? Began something like this. This group continued, and they continued to develop their innovations until by the end of the century, they actually gained political power. Didn't gain political power, but they basically influenced the rulers of that time, right? The rulers, the khulafa. And after influencing the rulers of that time, they then imposed these innovations upon the masses through the power of the rulers whom they had basically convinced. And as a result of that, many thousands of great scholars were actually killed, or they were imprisoned, or they were beaten, right? Because they wouldn't agree with these innovations, right? These innovations grew until even the people who spoke of them, they managed to get a tremendous amount of political power and political sway, and they brought this thing upon the people of knowledge, right? So here's something that might have begun as something small. Some guy sat in the gathering of Hassan al-Basri and he makes a remark, and something small, maybe. But what happens when he gets followers who follow him upon that doctrine? Then they get followers, then they sit down and start writing, right? And start developing the misguidance, because they've been misguided. It grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows until, in this example we saw, it's become a political force, leading to the slaughter and massacre of many thousands of scholars in the time of Imam Ahmad. So this is basically like 120 years afterwards we see this. So this is the nature of innovation, right? In fact, a good analogy would be a single spark can bring down an entire building. Yes or no? We know this from experience, don't we? We hear these stories all the time about this whole building, whatever, and it was because of some little glitch somewhere. It started as a little spark. Likewise, we see with forests, the entire, tens and tens of miles or hundreds of miles of forests just, burned. Well, that fire started as something minute, something very, very small. Then it grew, right? With the oxygen from the air and the wind blowing in a certain direction, the trees being next to each other, and the entire area is completely demolished, Right? And this is the nature of innovation. If you do not extinguish that misguidance from the very beginning, then it will do exactly what a fire does to an entire building or an entire forest. That's the analogy, right? Except that one is physical, physical things in the worldly affairs. This is in the religious affairs, which is even more dangerous, right? So as Al-Barbahari said, beware of the...
Can you explain the correct position regarding the belief of the Mu'tazila?
The correct position regarding the example I gave of the Mu'tazila, that's just one of their misguidances. There are other misguidances as well on the names and attributes of Allah, about the Quran, is it the speech of Allah, uncreated, whatever. But in this issue, the correct view is that Allah Azza wa Jal, nothing escapes, nothing is outside of His knowledge, nothing is outside of His power, nothing is outside of His creative power. Everything is a creation of Allah, right? And that includes the actions of man. So because Allah created you, your body, your essence, gave you limbs, gave you reason, gave you eyes and ears, allowed you to reason and think. He gave you a soul, which He inspired to be inclined towards the good, and which He also taught to have like a conscience, to be aware of evil. Then He sent messengers, then He sent books to show the right way and the wrong way, and then He left you to choose. Right? So when you choose to do a righteous deed or an evil deed, you are the doer of the deed. You did the deed, you are the doer. But Allah is the creator of the deed. Right? Allah created the deed. You are the doer of the deed. You are still responsible. And so there's no contradiction between you doing the deed and being responsible, and between Allah creating your deed. Right? There's no contradiction here between these two things. And we know this from our own experience, because if you try to use the argument that, well, I committed this sin, I stole this person's wealth, I robbed him because it was decreed for me. It's just predestination. Allah decreed it for me. So how can you say that I'm wrong? So the answer to him would be, you punch him in the face and you break his back and you kick him in the head, and you say, well, likewise, that's from Allah's decree as well. So how can you blame me for what I've done? Right? So you can't use the argument of the divine decree to show that there's any injustice. Everybody knows this is actually wrong, and you know that what that person did is actually unjust. It's unjust because you chose to do it and you knew it was wrong, right? You knew it was wrong and you chose to do it. So the argument that Allah creating your deed and you doing the deed after you knew it was evil and harmful and unlawful, and then being punished for it, there is no contradiction between these two things whatsoever. There's no contradiction at all. Right? So Allah is the creator of the deeds, man is the doer of the deeds, because man has received guidance that this is right and this is wrong. If you do this, there is punishment. If you do this, there is reward. Then you deliberately choose to go and do whatever, then you deserve punishment or you deserve reward by your own choice. And the fact that Allah knows that and decreed that and He created that is not injustice, right? What would have been injustice if Allah knew what you were going to do, then He created you, then He immediately punished you without leaving you to choose to do what you're going to do, if you know what I mean. Meaning that if Allah judged you by way of His knowledge alone, before you even acted, that would be injustice, yes? That would be injustice, yes? It's like saying, let's say you're going to send, I'll give you a simple example. Imagine you have a child, right? And you give the child some money. and you tell the child, right, when you go to the shop, you are not allowed to buy such and such. Right? But you already know, you know your child, and you know that this child, when he goes there, he's going to buy such and such. You just know what's going to happen. Yes? Right. So, you give the child the £5 or whatever it is, and before he leaves the door, you bring him back in, and you discipline him, because of your knowledge that he was going to do what you pretty much knew he was going to do. Now, is this justice? Because he hasn't done what you knew he was going to do. But this is not justice now, right? But if you let him go and he went, and then later on it came back to you through his sibling or something else that yes, he went and bought that thing he shouldn't have bought. Now you can discipline him, right? And maybe you might have even done that to allow as a means of teaching, and it might have been for that reason. This now is not injustice. Because he's done the thing that you knew he was going to do. He's done the thing, so now you can discipline, right? So injustice would be, in the case of al-qadr, if Allah already knows what He's going to create and what they are going to do, then He creates them, and then before they do what they do, you are judged on account of Allah's knowledge alone, prior knowledge alone. This would not be, However, Allah has created you. Allah has given you faculties, given you hearing, seeing, the ability to act, the ability to think, ability to reason, give you a conscience, give you fitrah, like original disposition. He gave you intellect. Then He sent books and messengers in which He explained the right path, the wrong path, what is wholesome, good, pure, impure, that which is beneficial, that which is harmful, that which is lawful, that which is unlawful. He explained everything, right? Then you choose, after having all that knowledge, you choose to do what you do. Then for you to be rewarded or punished, it is perfect justice. There's no injustice in this at all, whatsoever. Right? So that's the shubha of the Mu'tazila. Anyway, the point that we're really making there was coming back to the innovations. An analogy for innovations is like the spark or the fire. If you do not extinguish the fire, imagine, a small piece of your curtain or something being on fire, and you just sit there and indifferent, and you just watch your house burn. Well, see, this is the analogy between the people of the Sunnah. What does the person of the Sunnah do? He immediately gets up, right? He warns everybody else, there's a fire, and then he goes and gets a bucket of water, whatever, extinguishes the fire. Right? This is what he does, and this is the analogy for the people of the Sunnah. This is what we are upon. When we speak of these narrations, this is what we do in preservation of the religion. Now, as for the people of innovation and misguidance, they are indifferent to these things. Right? They don't like speech like this. So the analogy for them would be that the man is sat there, he's watching the house on fire, and he thinks, no, just leave this. This is just this is being harsh. To put the fire out and to extinguish the fire and to warn the people, this is being too harsh. That's the same analogy, except that this is in religious affairs which are more serious. Why? Because they relate to the hereafter, and this worldly issue of the house being on fire. Well, this is a worldly issue, Right? So Al-Barbahari, rahimahullah, he says. He continues and he says that the innovation begins as something small which resembles the truth. It's a bit obscure and it resembles the truth. And anyone who basically gets drawn into the innovation, he becomes deceived by it. And then he's not able to leave that innovation. Why? Because he's been convinced this is the truth, this is from the religion, this has evidence, and he's not able to leave it anymore. And then it becomes bigger and bigger, and until it becomes an actual doctrine, a school of thought, a religion which is followed. And then so as a result of this, a person then opposes and separates away from the straight path, and he departs from Islam. So Al-Barbahari continues, فانظر رحمك الله كل من سمعت كلامه